I think that there is this concept of being a good enough parent that's pushed in psychology. I think many of us forget that, and it's an important thing to keep in mind, is that the vast majority of the time we are more than good enough. And that's what kids need. They don't need a perfect parent. They don't need a parent who's not a real person. They don't need a parent who every birthday has 22 balloons and the lawn decorated and everything else. They need a parent who's good enough, who hears them, understands them, who listens to them.
If you love your kids and still feel like you're losing it sometimes, you've come to the right place. Welcome to Mom Essentials, where we dig into the best and messiest parts of motherhood. I'm Angie Weber, parent coach and creator of the Calm Approach to Parenting. In each episode, you will find real-life support, fresh strategies, and honest conversations to help you build more communication, connection, and calm at home. Together, we will focus on empowerment over perfection. Let's get into it. Hello, and welcome to this episode of Mom Essentials. We want our kids to do great things. We want them to do their best, but at what point does it go too far? Today, I'm thrilled and honored to be joined by Dr. Joshua Stein as we dive into the topic of toxic perfectionism. Dr. Stein is a clinical director and an attending clinician at Prairie Care's Youth Partial Hospitalization Program and operates a clinic out of Brooklyn Park, Minnesota. He was raised in the Twin Cities area and is a lifelong Minnesota sports fan, but after completing his bachelor's in science at Cornell University, he returned to Minnesota to attend the U of M Medical School. There, his interest in the field of psychiatry deepened, and he completed a general psychiatry residency and then a child adolescent psychiatry fellowship. Past president of the Minnesota Society for Child Adolescent Psychiatry, Dr. Stein continues to advocate for adolescents' mental health on the local and national levels with the goal to increase access to quality care. So thank you so much for hanging out with me today.
Absolutely honored to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yes. Well, for you listeners who are tuning in right now, I had reached out to Dr. Stein because I saw him present at a function that I went to, and he was talking about this topic of toxic perfectionism. And I thought it's such a relevant topic that doesn't get shared enough. And so I'm so grateful for you to be on here. Obviously, you have a lot of credentials, a lot of things happening, with your education and your professional side. But let's just kind of get into a little bit. Like, what do you qualify as toxic perfectionism?
Well, absolutely. And first off, I'd like to say, this was not part of my education in med school. This was not part of my education in residency or fellowship. It's something that I have learned as a parent, and I have 3 kids, and kind of as we go and we grow. And there is a real wave and a real push to be engaged in so many things and to do them at such a high level. And this is even different than it was a generation ago. And so, when you look at like where the money is spent, the amount of money in our country being spent on private tutoring, being spent on, like high-end training for like baseball or softball or basketball or hockey, especially in Minnesota, whatever it is really profound. And so we do see that this profound push to not just be good at things, but to be excellent at them. And amongst the families, whether it's in your community or not, there's a real feeling like if you're not doing everything, you're not throwing everything at it, you may feel like you're falling behind. And so there's one general question is, how do we teach kids to strive for excellence, to be joyful in what they do, that mistakes are excellent, they're part of learning, versus teaching them like, hey, you've got to be perfect, you've got to do everything. The highest goals are what we're trying to obtain, where when that is the goal, when that is the line in the sand, they may feel like almost everything else is a failure.
Yeah. Absolutely. I think you make a really interesting point too when you started off saying, like, I actually didn't necessarily learn this, in medical school and during my fellowship, but you learned a lot of it through your parenting experience too. And I'm sure not just seeing what's happening with your own kids, but seeing the peers and your friend groups who have children, and this big push and wave. And, they always say that there's no handbook to parenting. And I think a lot of it is, sometimes we feel like we're flying by the seat of our pants, and we're like, I just hope this works works out. I hope this, makes my kids turn out okay. But I think there's a lot to say there, even with all of your background and education, that you learned a lot of this just being a parent yourself and seeing the different trends among your kids and their peers.
I think that there is this concept of being a good enough parent that's pushed in psychology. And I think many of us forget that. And it's an important thing to keep in mind is that the vast majority of the time we are more than good enough.
Yeah.
And that's what kids need. They don't need a perfect parent. They don't need a parent who's not a real person. They don't need a parent who every birthday has 22 balloons and the lawn decorated and everything else. They need a parent who's good enough, who hears them, understands them, who listens to them. And at times, with social media, with the pursuit of really this high level of perfectionism, that can get lost.
Yeah. Yeah, and again, I think that's I love that you said that because I always say too, like you don't need to be your parent. Your kids don't want a perfect parent; they just want you. They just want their parent to be engaged, and they want to know they have a safe space. But as you were kind of saying, like we get so overloaded as parents, and a lot of it, I think, is those social highlight reels that we see all the time. We see the fully executed lawn and the perfect birthday cake and the house filled up with balloons, and then we don't see the background of that. We don't see if there were, a ton of fights and the stressed out mom trying to put that all together. We just see the after version of it. And so for us parents, we feel like, oh, I'm not doing enough. I need to be doing all of these things. So as it relates back to children, especially because we can look at it with, obviously athletics, but then also academics, with children. I guess my kids are in fifth grade right now, and I feel like they're already kind of getting pushed of like, well, what do you want to do when you grow up? I'm like, they're 11. Like, I didn't know what I wanted to do when I was 11.
Or
But
like, which sport are you going to specialize in? Or like, you have to choose. Like, are you going to be in theater? Or are you going to just be play an instrument because you have to lean into that, and it has to be 20 hours a week. You're a third grade gymnast, and you're going to do comp gymnastics. That is 4 hours a week, 4 nights a week with competitions. There is this specialization, this intensity that is growing increasingly unique, and it's widespread. And we do see industries being developed around it too. And so as a parent, it's very easy to fall into that and be very thrilled that your kid is talented and special. The flip side, it's very easy to push them to a point that if they're not, tops of everything, it feels like a failure. And,
yeah.
and that actually can be one of the most detrimental and dangerous lessons that we teach kids when we hyper specialize and push that hard.
Yeah, totally understandable. So, you said that there's this wave, even from the last generation, of, pushing our kids into these types of things. So, I guess I kind of have a twofold question for you. One, is
Sure.
it more with your experience? Is it the parents who are pushing this on their children? Or is it the children who are kind of because they're seeing the social pressure and being exposed to social media and things like that? Is it more of the kids who are falling into this by themselves?
That's a really good question. And I think both are likely true. We see that, from 1989, I think the psychological bulletin showed that, we're seeing a really significant increase from like the 80s into the 2020s of like 30 to 40% of teenagers are displaying perfectionistic tendencies.
Mm.
I don't think that exists in a vacuum or a bubble. And I don't think it's really anyone's fault either. I think we're very human. And when we have opportunities, when we're told our kid can be super successful, when we see this going on in other ways, we go for it. I think when our kids are presented with that in other ways, they also will lean into it. And I think more than ever, we have the ability to do that nowadays, at least some families do, to lean in deeply. I think it's important when we do that, or whether we choose to do that, how we can do it, that it's still okay to make mistakes.
Mm.
It's still okay to learn from those mistakes. You know, when we have the right idea but can't execute it,
Mhm.
or we execute something but we maybe didn't understand it correctly,
Mhm.
and to say, man, your execution on that play, on that power play in hockey was excellent, but this is what we're looking for. But I'm really excited about what you can execute. Or I saw you try and make that pass
Yeah.
and you weren't able to make it yet, but man, I knew what you were thinking. And I'm really proud of you. And so that's like a rough metaphor for kind of all of life and how we should be thinking about it.
Yeah.
Because when we fall into, if you don't do it right, it's wrong. Kids get set up to a point that, man, if I don't knock it out of the park, I'm failing.
Hmm.
When, to use more sports metaphors, it's okay to get a triple, it's okay to get a double, it's okay to get a single, it's okay to hit a line drive that you spanked that they caught because you hit it right at them. These are all parts of the game, and we're not expecting perfection. And so the more that we raise our kids in that way, where we see them doing things generally better and learning from it, that's a really positive thing.
Yeah. Now, do you see it very typical though with the adolescents? And again, I'm not sure if there's a difference between like this generation versus the last couple generations, because we do want to build up that resilience. And that's one of the great things that sports can teach our kids. Also getting involved in, maybe if they're not athletic in like science fairs and different academic extracurriculars that way. But when they start getting so down on themselves and we say like, hey, I know you tried, like, I really like that hit that you had. I know you put it right to the first baseman. They caught it. You got out. Like, that stinks. So you did a really great job. It was a great hit. But what if they continue on this route of like, "Ah, I'm just awful. I'm never going to be able to get a double or a triple or a home run." Like, how do we continue to um, build that resilience in our children when they're not necessarily receptive to it at the beginning?
Sure. So kind of low frustration tolerance, very focused on outcome, not focused on process, can be a really big deal, especially if they see some of their peers who are more successful or doing better than them. And so, number one, we point out um, that you're meant to be making mistakes, and you have to understand that. And your goal, I know you want to be, the top 1%, but that's not the goal today.
Yeah.
And the goal is about learning and about making mistakes and going through it. But we do have to know our kids, and some kids will get very black or white. It will be all or nothing themes, um, and when they're getting stuck like that, sometimes, I talk about that we all have our own intuitive parenting styles. We have our own kind of innate parenting ability, and some kids will push us outside of our own abilities. And so that is where, listening, whether it's listening to your podcast or working with a therapist, working with a family therapist, it may be that, you say, as a parent, I can tell how hard this is for you.
Mhm.
And when it doesn't go your way, how stuck you get. And I can tell, like, I can't help you enough with it. I'd like to do some other things to help you because I see you're not having the joy that I'd want you to have from the experiences.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. And when I work with parents too, and I ask that question because I feel like I'm hearing it more and more from parents of like my son or daughter, they just get so emotional when they fail. And I always say like failure is a great learning lesson, and they also need to see us fail so they can understand how we cope with that failure as well, so that they can hopefully pick up on some of those traits and model the same behaviors. But I think, and you can disagree with me on this, but I think a large part when we get into those situations, when we try to help our kids be resilient or we try kind of redirect them, we end up getting more frustrated because of their reaction, which can lead into kind of a domino effect. So I think us learning to understand our emotions when we don't get the response we want to is a key part of it as well.
Yeah. I also think a lot of times we get very, as a parent, I've fallen into this before, the immediate time after something that's less successful or the kid is frustrated and they're displaying a lot of their emotions and we want to fix it, we want to process it, we want to, talk about the outcome and other things, and we're also processing what just occurred, whether it's a flub in school, whether it's a flub in whatever it is. And we need to be aware that they may just need somebody that they can express their emotions to, and then they may be able to talk through things better at a different point. But to
Yeah.
borrow from like DBT, they're not in their wise mind at those points when they're so angry. They're in their emotional mindset, and we need to kind of help them get through that and support them and maybe be a bit of a sponge for their emotion. And
Sure.
that's not the time that we're like, hey, let's learn, let's learn. Now, later we can talk through it. And so maybe this happens at 3 p.m., this challenge where they felt like they didn't meet their expectations. And it, from 3 to 4, there's no learning that's going to happen. There's just challenges. So we sponge, and then later that evening, when we're sitting on the edge of their bed, when we're talking things through with them, that's the opportunity to circle back to it. What I've learned is often parents will be much more frustrated long term with some of these things and still need to process them when the kids have already made it to the, what would it be, the after party from the theater performance, or they've made it to the pool party after, and they're moving on, and they're kind of with their friends and they're celebrating, and they can kind of move forward. And so we need to be wary of that too.
Yeah.
um, the kind of the parenting style that can lead to some of these challenges is this kind of classic authoritarian parenting style, where we have very high expectations, and then we have kind of low responsiveness unless those expectations are met, and we have a low distress tolerance. And so it's like we've kind of set the bar way up high, and then if we can't reach that point, we're very controlling, very upset. Success is the only expectation, and then kids really feel like they're failing all the way up until they finally hit the point that they can be successful. And so we really need to make sure we're providing them a ladder of steps that they can be successful at, and that's probably the most important thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And so when it comes to that, because we talked a lot about failure already, and one of the things that we want to be concerned about is how our children are processing and expressing failure with their different emotions. And so I would love for you to share a little bit about, what are some risks that maybe parents should be looking out for, and what are some alternative coping skills that they could be providing for their children or their teens in order to process when things don't go as perfect as they want them to.
So there's a lot there. Uh, and so, one challenge that we can see is for high functioning perfectionistic kids is it actually leads them to do worse in a lot of different things.
Mm,
They can get very stuck on things needing to be perfect, the language, the rhetoric when they're writing needs to be perfect, that they don't allow themselves to make mistakes. But on the other hand, they really struggle to complete their assignments. Things are never good enough. We can see procrastination become a profound issue. We can see sometimes kind of vague physical health concerns show up when they're worried about something that they feel is defining to them. So a big game, the big performance, the big exam. They may not be able to take any criticism, have a lot of frustration, irritability when mistakes are made, stuff like that. They may also really struggle to prioritize or make any decisions. They're self-critical, self-conscious, easily embarrassed. So those are kind of some of the patterns that we can
yes.
see. And sometimes that can then start to spin and be more than just patterns, more than just kind of aspects of personality, but really start to present the kids with kind of like anxiety, social anxiety, themes of OCD, emergence of depression. Sometimes when they feel they can't express emotions, they'll take control of other parts of their life. So we see often eating disorders develop, like anorexia, bulimia, and then a lot of physical expression of carrying this like demand, this stress upon their shoulders. And so kind of that burnout, that exhaustion, stomach aches, headaches, insomnia, changes to sleep, other things like that. And so we do see a lot of kids with that have very high expectations for themselves, or families that place it on them. I feel like they start to just kind of like be worn out and be worn internally and externally, and then they start to withdraw. And so sometimes that means we actually have to remove some of these expectations. We may need to really take a step back and say, I see, like, look at the expectations that are for themselves. As a parent, my job isn't anymore to kind of push them. It's
Mm,
actually to support them and to be the bumpers on the lanes and to honor how hard they're working and maybe help them see the progress that they've made,
yeah.
and help them know that it's okay however they are. And it's tricky, but if you can work to validate their progress and work to really point out like that mistake was worthwhile, and you're going to learn from it and grow from it, that's a huge deal.
Yeah.
Um, like like you need to get fired from a couple jobs or screw up at a couple jobs to start to learn some of those things. It's why as a physician you do you go and you do training where there's a resident and a fellow and a doctor above you. And then the next step is you're the resident with the fellow and the attending physician. And the next step is you're the fellow and there's an attending physician. Then you're the attending physician. That's a like legitimately a decade plus long process
Yeah.
because there's a lot of development that needs to happen. And so just remembering that is really important. There's so much here. It's like hard to just
I know.
focus on one thing.
I know there's a lot, right? And I'm glad that you said about how all of a sudden they can start procrastinating, or unfortunately it can develop into some more severe situations like an eating disorder, or maybe, bad depression or self-harming or suicidal ideation. And I think that's really hard sometimes for parents to see their children go through that transition, especially if their child is one of those really high achieving people, and they never really had to push them maybe in an instance, and then all of a sudden they see their kids not turning in their homework, or they're not getting their stuff done on time, or it in I
And
think for sorry.
yeah, no, Angie, and like to say what you're saying, we see patterns where kids who've been incredibly successful in almost everything suddenly kind of reach a point that they can't be successful, they can't carry that water anymore,
Yeah.
and like the entire switch flips off.
Yeah.
And so they go from being in like numerous AP classes, like very successful in a sport, very successful in extracurriculars. It's like, wow, like here's your Harvard application,
Yeah.
to like they refuse to go to school. They're exasperated, they're pressing, they're like, I just want to get a GED. And it's like, wow, like we've gone from like here, we've dropped all the way down to a different level. And there's nothing wrong with getting a GED, but this kid has all this potential. What do we do about that? And so those themes of like it's either fully successful or I'm a failure, we need to help them see like, hey, like even if you never do an AP class again and you do standard classes and you graduate, that's a success. And
Yeah.
if you found like caring that much is too much for you, that's an important thing to know about. So in the future, that doesn't happen.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
just
I think that's such an important piece for listeners to hear, hopefully, because maybe it's not them, maybe it's their partner or their co-parent who, is maybe more of the pusher too, or maybe a listener is. And I always think for us as parents, we jump to conclusions sometimes. And my personal thought is that we're at high capacity so often that we just
yeah.
jump into like, oh, well, my kid must be hanging out with the wrong kid, like friend group, or something else must be happening. And we don't take enough time to really step back and observe what's happening, especially if we see this big shift of like you're a straight A student, you're in all the AP classes, you're on track to go to Harvard, and then all of a sudden maybe their sophomore junior year it just dips down, and we try grasp at like, oh well, it must be this or this, instead of stepping back and really becoming aware of what the root cause could be so that we can get to the main issue, versus trying to put a band-aid on it and be like, well, you just can't go out anymore with your friends because that's got to be the reason why you're like this right now.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think being empathetic, being curious as a parent is really important. Honoring mistakes when they happen, pointing out when you make mistakes and that you're a real person and like, man, I'm sorry. Like I was so pissed off last night. So it just changed. We just had our daylight savings time. I don't know when you're going to air this, but like 9:30 last night, I was like worn out and I was not like my 100% parenting. I was probably 40%.
Yeah.
And to like come back and say like, what do I look like? And let them say it and be real, especially as kids get older, is really, really important because we're teaching them to reframe things. A lot of kids I talk to, and this is not specific just to this topic, but it's like we are so hard on ourselves, and especially perfectionistic kids. Like they may look in the mirror and be so frustrated by one hair is out of, you know, the problematic, and they sit there and they sit there and try and fix it and whatever. And it's like if you had a friend who was dealing with this and you saw them doing that, what would you say to them? How would you honor him? If you had a friend who was struggling this way or making mistakes or not being successful, how would you treat them? Would you beat on them? Would you emotionally tell them they're worthless? Would you shift into a point that you may think of harming them? Of course not.
Yeah.
You'd be compassionate, you'd be supportive, you'd honor their steps. How can you treat yourself kindly and be a friend to yourself, be a bestie, be whatever it is in the same way? And so really trying to give them a greater perspective on that. So I think that's really important. in residency would always kind of end our day with kind of like what went well today, and then what could we have done differently.
Hmm.
This was kind of led by our chief resident or somebody who was training us, and I carried that as I kind of moved up in training, and I still use that with kids I work with because it's not that what didn't go wrong today. It's like, what can we do differently? What can we learn from?
Yeah.
Because life is a learning experience.
Yeah, absolutely. And we can't be meh, like happy all the time because that just wouldn't be realistic to what life is. And that's why, as before we started the recording, I said, I really love to work with parents who have kids around like 5 to 12 years old because I feel like that's such a moldable time for them, especially in like understanding how to be resilient and how to overcome the mistakes because, and I've talked about this on before, and I swear I'm landing the plane here. We're coming back to the topic, but when I heard of lawnmower parents, the parents who like to mow out all the obstacles, or some people call them like snowblower parents, things like that. And although they're trying to do it from a good place, that they want to see their kids happy and thriving, the challenge is that we're actually doing a disservice to our children because when they do come to face with rejection, whether it's from a friend or a romantic interest or a job or something doesn't go right, later on in life, and we're not there to fix the problem, they're going to have a harder time understanding, oh, wait, how do I get through that? But I love the idea of like what went well and what didn't, and we do that, and it's a part of my planner as well about really sharing like what was your highlight of the day, what was the most challenging part, and then we always love in our family to end it on kind of a fun note by saying like what's the silliest thing that happened to you today. And just sharing those kind of routine, I feel, is a really great job of or a great way to have children kind of put it into perspective like, oh yeah, that was a hard day, part yesterday, but actually this was the best part of my day today, and that didn't even bother me now 24 hours later.
Yep. And so you got to be really careful to not just have it be like the only goal is success, that
Mm.
the goal is development. And I think we have a lot of parents and kids that we get lost in. We're always developing toward something, and it's okay to enjoy what we're doing.
Yeah.
T-ball is a mess, but it is hilarious and enjoyable mess. But it's very easily to get frustrated with the messiness of it and just want better execution. But you only get 2 years of T-ball. You only get 2 years of squirts, 2 years of pee-wee. You only get one or two middle school plays. Those should not be perfect. Those are growth opportunities.
Yeah.
You don't just like jump into reading the book Ulysses. You read like Dick and Jane, and then you read Cat in the Hat. Like these are stepwise things, and so enjoy the steps with your kid. Enjoy their silliness, their age, their ability to make mistakes. Praise them in them. You're not gonna ride a bike without skidding your knees a bunch of times.
Yeah.
That's going to happen, and so just remembering those mistakes are probably where the learning moments happen. And when things are too easy, and when you lawn mow or you snow blow here in Minnesota as a parent, you're not giving them the age appropriate developmental opportunities to make low stakes, moderate stakes mistakes.
Hmm.
You're kind of waiting for the point that they may be on their own, and those are really costly, problematic, and can be life defining.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Dr. Stein, I know you have so much other things that you could tell my parents, and I feel like we just scratched the surface because, again, after I saw your presentation on this whole subject, I had tons of notes and I couldn't wait to ask you to come on here. And so I know my parents who are listening probably want to know more. Where is the best place for them to go find more information about you or toxic perfectionism, or if they're, maybe they have a child who's dealing with this, what are the best avenues for them to look into?
Okay, so I'm in the Twin Cities. I work with Prairie Care, and so we work at higher levels of care for mental health. And if you're feeling that your kid is, I think a lot of times in mental health we get stuck on this idea that we need it when there's a safety concern. But
Mm.
that's not always the case. If you feel that perfectionism or mental health challenges, whatever it may be, is leading to morbidity, loss of functioning, they can't face the day, they're struggling to make it to school, and you're, as a parent, you're uncertain, I think Prairie Care is a really good place to reach out to get some additional support. We have a lot of different types of programs, a lot of different types of targeted care. I think also If this is something you want to know more about, I think you can talk to your pediatrician about it as well. And if it's something you feel like as a family you're struggling with or you're dealing with, I think that there's some real nice opportunities for short course family therapy. I think a lot of us worry that, hey, I'm going to get stuck in therapy for years and I don't have time. I don't have time for that. But truly, like 5 to 10 sessions with a family therapist can be incredibly productive. And again, I said it before, we all have our intuitive skill ability, we all have our intuitive styles. And trust me, they don't all match up perfectly in a family. I have 3 kids, and there's ways I match up really well with one of them, and there's a miss with the other. And that's real. And we're not, so go and learn and practice some new things. That can be really worthwhile.
Yeah, I love that advice because I like to say that as well when I talk about building up people's or parents' toolboxes. I have 11-year-old twins, and I will tell you that the tools that I use with my daughter are very different than the tools that I use with my son when I want to get the exact same outcome. So I love the encouragement of just going out there, learning more, seeking that help before it gets to that dire situation, too, right? Like being a little bit more preventative if you see some of this stuff happening in your home or with your children. But I'll have like the Facebook links and stuff like that for Prairie Care in the show notes. So audience, definitely go check those out. Dr. Stein, thank you again so much for being on and sharing about this. I really encourage our listeners to look into this even more. But yeah, thank you so much for being on. And of course, listeners, stick around for the Essential Minute coming up next, and we'll see you next time on Mom Essentials.
Thank you so much, Angie.
Hey, thanks for sticking around for this Essential Minute. All right, let's talk about Calmer. After today's conversation on perfectionism, this is one of those tools that can really support what we talked about. Because when a child feels like everything has to be perfect, their body often goes into stress mode. You might see it as frustration, shutting down, or those big emotional reactions when something doesn't go right. But underneath it all, their nervous system is overwhelmed. Calmer is a soothing blend designed to promote relaxation and emotional balance, which is especially helpful for kids who tend to get stuck in those high-pressure moments. You can roll it on their wrists, the back of their neck, or the bottom of their feet before things like school, sports, or homework. You know, those moments where expectations feel high and the pressure starts to build. It can also be really helpful after those moments when things don't go as planned, when they're hard on themselves or struggling to move past a mistake. Because again, before we can shift the mindset, we have to help those little bodies settle. And this applies to us too, parents. When you're feeling frustrated or caught in the cycle of pushing and correcting, this can be a simple way to pause and reset. Perfectionism thrives in pressure, but growth happens when those spaces to breathe, reset, and try again are opened up. And this is one small tool that can help you create that space. If you want to find out more about Calmer and how to add it to your parenting toolbox, head to the show notes and click the link. Happy oiling! Thanks for listening to this episode of Mom Essentials. If you're looking for simple ways to bring more communication, connection, and calm into your home, head to theparenttoolbox.info and check out the Calm Family Planner. And as a special thanks for being a listener, you can take $5 off with the code ESSENTIALS. That's code ESSENTIALS. Want more tips in between episodes? Follow us on Instagram at theparenttoolbox. See you next time.